Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about complete sets of Mozart symphonies. All of them, or most of them. What do I mean by that? Well, here's the thing. No one is exactly sure how many symphonies Mozart wrote. And the definition of a symphony by Mozart is kind of a loose one. As you may know, there are 41 numbered symphonies, but there's a bunch of other things that you could call symphonies. These include three-movement opera overtures. These include extracts taken from his multi-movement serenades, which could have 6 or 7 or whatever many movements they might have. And you could take 3 or 4 of them and slam them together and poof, you get a symphony. You take the other movements and poof, you get a concerto. Mozart wrote a lot of symphonic music, not all of which got grouped together as a symphony. Then, of course, there's the marvelous Symphony No. 37, which isn't by Mozart at all. It's by Michael Haydn, and only the introduction was by Mozart. But that sort of encapsulates the problem with this, because despite the fact that Mozart is one of the greatest geniuses in the history of music, perhaps the greatest prodigy in the history of music, the fact of the matter is that he worked within a style, within a common practice. And unless something by him is immediately graspably imbued with the flame of genius, you might not know who wrote it. And only the fact that it's by Mozart, some of these pieces, makes us care about them now. Now, that's not a bad thing, because the quality of music from this period was very high. Composers working within this practice were able to achieve very, very fine results just by sticking to the basic rules, you know? You didn't always have to have a flash of genius in everything that you did to write very, very attractive music. And Mozart did that quite frequently. And this is particularly true of the earlier symphonies, which, as you know, were composed while Mozart was still in the womb. I mean, he was such a prodigy. I think symphonies 1 through 5 were composed while he was only in his second trimester. And we know that Leopold Mozart helped him compose them, which of course is inevitable if you're stuck in the womb. I mean, what Leopold did was listen to Mozart thumping out the rhythms and humming the tunes, and he transcribed them for orchestra. Then when he got to his third trimester, he did the next small batch of symphonies. And then finally, after he was actually born and like breathing air, he was able to do the first symphonies in the teens, you know, numbers 12 through 20 or something like that. There's a wonderful ultrasound of Mrs. Mozart with, you know, a very precocious little baby inside of her, which you can actually see conducting with his little hands, you know. It's very adorable. Maybe I'll show it to you someday. But, you know, Mozart was extremely young when he wrote this stuff, and he was writing within the style. He wasn't trying to be a genius. He was a genius, but he wasn't trying to be. And so the early Mozart symphonies are greatly outnumber the later Mozart symphonies, first of all. And second of all, they're really early. The symphonies basically come in 2 batches. There's like really early stuff, and then they start to thin out until you get to the 3 great last symphonies, which he composed in 1788. And then he wrote no more for the rest of his brief life, for the 4 years remaining to him. And so we need to be very, very honest about the quality of what he wrote. It is astonishing for a fetus, amazing for an embryo, but is it astonishingly great music? No, it's not. It's very pleasant. And if it didn't have Mozart's name attached to it, nobody would care. I remember very, very, very vividly the Mozart year. Do you remember the Mozart year? 1992, 200 years after the death of Mozart. And oh my God, because this was at the time just before the big collapse in the classical music industry, where they were recording everything with everybody, and the Mozart section in the record shops was just getting huge, full of stuff nobody played, nobody listened to, nobody cared about, in multiple versions. And that stuff has been recorded, and that's one of the reasons I can talk to you about so many complete Mozart symphony sets. It's a relic of that period, and very, very interesting things happened in the history of music in conjunction with that period, with the year 1992. And then, of course, that passed, and the record business went down the toilet, and there's still tons of Mozart, tons and tons and tons of Mozart. And even his early works have multiple recordings and multiple versions, and who buys them and who listens to them? I don't know. I do. What can I tell you? It's part of the job, and maybe you do too. But we need to be a little bit discriminating, and we need to be honest about what the product really is. And so to make your life easy, here's the thing I want you to remember. At all costs, when you think about early Mozart symphonies, remember the number 31. 31 is the Paris Symphony. That is generally regarded as the first mature Mozart symphony. Some people like 29 as well, but 31 is really where the big guns come out. And Mozart starts to sound really super duper personal and unlike any other composer of his age. So that's what you need to know. And the ones that comprise his late works are numbers 31 through 41, minus 37, of course. So that's not a lot. That's well, figure it out, 9 symphonies or so. And there are really only 6 really late ones. There's 35, 36, 38, 39, 40, and 41. And I did a video on that batch alone, because those are the ones that everybody really cares about, starting with the Hofner Symphony, which is number 35. And the others, I mean, however marvelous they may be in spots, they aren't as great. It's that simple. They just aren't. So remember 31. But you may also see symphonies with numbers higher than 41. And when you do, those are all early symphonies. They just gave them later numbers, but they're all very, very early. They belong with the first in vitro batch of Mozart symphonies. So, you don't need to think that there's some late masterpiece that you forgot about or that somehow went missing. It didn't. We're very, very clear on the symphonies that Mozart wrote in his later years. We're much less clear about the stuff that he wrote in his earlier years. You may recall about, 30 years ago maybe? There was a new supposed Mozart symphony discovered in Odense, Denmark, which was called the Odense Symphony. And everyone rushed out and recorded it. It was like 9 minutes long and 3 little movements, and it sounded like anybody. And now we're not so sure whether it's by Mozart or not. That's what happens with these things. We just don't know. We just don't know, because Mozart just dripped music out of his diapers, along with all of the other things he was dripping out of his diapers. So with that said, I have here 10 sets of complete Mozart symphonies in stereo. And just the fact that they exist is kind of remarkable. And we're going to go through them one by one and talk about their pluses and minuses. And you can make up your mind which ones you want, assuming you don't already have them all. So first, when I was a kid, back in the day, the one that everyone had, the reference edition, was Karl Böhm with the Berlin Philharmonic. Now, this set was really, really a big deal, because Böhm was a major, major conductor, a major Mozart conductor, and no one else ever bothered doing any of the earlier Mozart symphonies. So this was an incredibly important set discographically. It had the Berlin Philharmonic. It was about as classy a project as anybody could have done back in that day, and it's held up very well. Böhm was a wonderful Mozart conductor. Some people find these performances a little heavy-handed and lethargic compared to the period instrument performances. They certainly are slower, but the playing is gorgeous. I don't think that Böhm's tempos are terribly slow. I think everything is very, very musical, and his love for Mozart is evident all the way through. Now, this set contains 46 symphonies of, the however many there may be, and that was a very good number in that day. Now the number has sort of gone down to 45, more or less. But like I said, there are many options that you have to add to them. After Böhm, we got this guy. Is this it? Yes, Neville Marriner. Remember Neville Marriner? Neville Marriner with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. Now, this was a big deal because it was, first of all, in a chamber orchestra with reduced forces. It wasn't a big orchestra. It was the first effort towards a more, what you might call, idiomatic or stylish approach to this music. And they're all very neatly played. They're typical Mariner performances. Actually, I find them a little dull. They're a bit faceless, especially the later ones. You know, it's typical Mariner. The playing is neat, it's clean, it's precise, it's well recorded, it sounds attractive at all points, and I think, well, somewhat boring. That's how I feel about it. So that's that deal. And in the wake of that, Universal started coupling things to make Mozart cycles that didn't exist. For example, this one on Phillips. Now this has Mariner in all of the early symphonies until we get Joseph Kripp's and the Concertgebouw for the late symphonies. And those are terrific. I mean, when I did my late symphony thing, some people mentioned, you didn't talk about Kripp's. Well, this is why. Because first of all, the Kripp's performances, you can't find them separately. It's very, very hard to find them now. They were available as Budgie Phillips things, and they were never released in a box. They were all released as separate things, but they were put in here, in this box, along with the Neville Mariner earlier ones, and so you could get a complete Mozart cycle that way. But this was really worth having because Mariner is good in the less interesting symphonies, because these are not symphonies that require that you illuminate them with your directorial genius. They simply need to be well played, and they're pretty and they're attractive. But the late ones, that's where you need to have some personality to show a little bit of what you're made of. And Kripp's and the Concertgebouw do that. Now this box is out of print. You may be able to find it around if you want it. It's an improvement, probably over Boehm and Mariner, I think, just for the quality of the work. It combines kind of the best of both worlds, the big band Mozart and the chamber music Mozart in the early stuff. But then, oh my, the universe shifted, the heavens opened, and authentic instruments, historically informed performance practice began. And it began, as you know, in Baroque music. And that was really where it stayed for a very, very long time, until we started getting close to the Mozart year, until the 80s, really. And at that point, we started hearing from these guys, Christopher Hogwart and the Academy of Ancient Music. Now, they had been doing Baroque music mostly, and then they announced a Mozart cycle, and this is a super duper, uber complete Mozart cycle. This contains symphonies 1 through 41 plus 27 other symphonies and symphonic pieces of various kinds. So this was very exciting because in addition to the normal symphonies, in addition to being done on period performance, which in those days was really selling the idea of authenticity, which of course we now know is complete and total bullshit. But in those days, we believed it initially. We were very naive. We were so naive. But anyway, we believed what they were, the stuff that they were feeding us. And these came in, remember, they were Loiseau-Lyre in those beautiful individual boxes with each volume of symphonies. And they were organized by period and when they were written. And they had beautifully written notes by serious scholars. It was the birth of serious applied musicology as applied to the standard repertoire. Because back when they were all doing all that Baroque stuff, I mean, nobody cared because no one else was playing it. It was specialty repertoire by geeky musicologists for specialty ensembles. But taking on Mozart, that was mainstream. And so that was a really, really big deal. And we were promised the world with these performances. It was Mozart's sound. It was all of his symphonic music. It was just a list of firsts. And I collected them avidly, and I'll bet a lot of you did too. And they haven't worn well, have they? They really haven't. Why? Because these, since then, period instrument groups have just gotten better. They have better quality instruments or facsimiles thereof. They play them more effectively. They've been together for longer. Some of them have learned to put the vibrato back in the strings, so they sound normal, the way string sections ought to sound. And Christopher Hogwart, who was running this and who was a wonderful musical scholar and a great performer in certain repertoire, was never never the kind of characterful interpreter that we expect in this music. I mean, that's just the truth. That's just the truth. And so these were epochal recordings. They really were. Historically, they were beautifully made of their type and of their period, but they have dated. They sound their age. And I never thought I'd be saying that, you know? It's really kind of sad, isn't it? But there you go. And then, with the door open, and 1992 happened, we began to get Mozart complete editions. And those Mozart complete editions had Mozart symphonies in them. And here's one. Oh, my God. Here's the Brilliant Classics one, Mozart edition. Now, this has the complete Mozart symphonies on period instruments, conducted by Jaap ter Linden, with the, I don't know, remember what they're called, the Mozart Contraption of Amsterdam, or the Mozart Brigade of Amsterdam, or, you know, something like that, you know, the Mozart, whatever it was, you know, a pack of Amsterdam. That's in here. They're available separately, too, on Brilliant Classics. Just remember Jaap ter Linden. I don't need to worry about the ridiculous name of the group, because it's just a pickup ensemble of period instrument people anyway. They're remarkably good. They're quite good. And then more Mozart cycles started to happen. Lots of them. There's one on Naxos that's not bad. There's one on Capriccio that has the Mozarteum, you know, Orchestra of Salzburg. I think it's with Hans Graf. It's okay. I mean, the Mozarteum people were never very good unless Sándor Vég was conducting them. So, yeah, it was no longer a big deal to do complete Mozart symphony cycles. I mean, when you think about it, the record industry waited for decades, almost a century, you know, before we had one. You know, we got one in stereo. That was it. And then all of a sudden, poofo, everyone was just, you know, like this, do the Mozart symphonies. Do that Mozart on, you know, start on Sunday. You're done on Tuesday. Go figure. So now we're going to talk about the remaining boxes. And I have, let's see, we've gone through 1, 2, 3, 4, only 6. Only 6, I think. I only took out 10, which I really think is enough, don't you? 10 times 45-ish symphonies, that's 450 symphonies. I think that's enough to keep you busy for a few minutes. I really do. So let's look at what they are. This is a nice one. This is Jeffrey Tate with the English Chamber Orchestra. Tate, of course, was another splendid Mozart conductor. These performances have face. They have personality. You may think some of his slow movements are a little slow. I think the forward wind balances are wonderful. The late symphonies, I think, have plenty of personality, and so do some of the earlier ones, which is kind of nice. It's a very, very beautiful set. It really is. I enjoy it. I go back to it and listen to it, individual titles, fairly frequently, because I know that they're going to be invariably enjoyable, and sometimes there's going to be just something surprising that grabs you. So that was really nice. But then once Hogwart had settled down and it was no longer a big deal to do Mozart on period instruments, as Jaap ter Linden shows you, Pinnock showed up, because remember, there was this sort of British competition between period instrument people, even though the orchestras all consisted of almost identical players. Remember, looking on the back, it's a trumpet, Crispy and Steele Perkins. Remember, it was all the same people. It made no difference what they called themselves. They could be the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, the Academy of Ancient Music, the English Concert, the Hanover Band, you know, your grandmother's jinglers. It just didn't make any difference. It's the same 20, 25, 30 people, you know, the London Classical Players. I mean, how many of them were there? There was, what was Parrots, Andrew Parrots people, the I don't remember what they were called, the Fried Chickens, I don't know. There was the something consort, or it was just a million of them. And they were all the same people. They were all just played to play, and they did their thing. You know, I have to say this very, very strongly, however great these people are and how talented they are, they were basically studio musicians. You know, versatile musicians who could do anything on the day professionally. There is no substitute for a great orchestra that has been playing together as a corporate entity for decades. There just is not. And anyone who tells you otherwise is full of garbage. It's just a ridiculous notion. That said, by the time Pinnock came along, these people were playing a little better than they were under Hogwart. I like this cycle. It's a very, very good Mozart cycle, I think. The playing is in tune. It's attractive. It has all of the qualities you want in terms of period sonority, in terms of, snappy rhythms and cutting trumpets and drums. And it's really a lovely, lovely cycle. And it's held up much better than Hogwarts has, in my opinion. So that's Pinnock. Next. Which one is this? Oh, yeah. Then as sort of the update to Karl Böhm, this is the updated Böhm, we got James Levine with the Vienna Philharmonic. I think this is also a terrific Beethoven cycle. It is typical Levine, which is sort of updated George Szell. It has, lean textures, very focused rhythms. It's the Toscanini tradition of Mozart, except that Toscanini wasn't too keen on Mozart. Levine was. Now, how you feel about James Levine in light of the recent news about his behavior and his subsequent dismissal from the Met, I leave to you. I'm only talking about the music. It's an excellent, excellent Mozart cycle. The only thing I don't like about it, and I don't like about it in a lot of these period instrument performances too, is that he takes all the repeats in the slow movement of the G minor symphony. That makes it 15 freaking minutes long? That's absolutely insane. Insane to have a 15-minute long slow movement when you do all the repeats. You should never take all the repeats, or you should play it at double tempo, one way or another. It's an andante. It should not take 15 minutes. It so overbalances the rest of the symphony. And this is not like Haydn's 68th Symphony, which also has this monstrously long slow movement, but where the rest of the symphony is sort of designed around it. You don't get that sense with Mozart's G minor symphony. I'll bet he didn't take the repeats. He just stuck them in there because repeats are what you stuck in there. I don't know. I just find it to be a little bit crazy. And Levine always stuck with those repeats. And some of these other people do too. It's up to you. I only want to hear it once. I listen to the exposition in that movement and I skip ahead sometimes because it just makes me nuts to have to wait for 15 minutes for it to be over. But the Levine DG cycle is first class. And you've got the Vienna Philharmonic doing all of them. However, we are down to our last two. And here they are. And I'm very, very excited to talk to you about them because they're both reasonably recent. They're both digital recordings. We have Adam Fischer and Charles Mackerras. These are my cycles of choice for complete cycles, not necessarily for individual symphonies and not necessarily for sets of the last bunch. I refer you to my video on the late Mozart symphonies for my choices of the last bunch. But why are these, I think, the two finest cycles? Well, I'll tell you. First, let's talk about Adam Fischer. This is the most recent one. It's on the Da Capo label, and it's marvelous. It's with the Danish National Chamber Orchestra. These are both modern instrument performances informed by historically informed practice. And I really think that gives you the best of both worlds. They really do. These two cycles are actually quite different. And they're different in a very, very interesting way. With Fischer, you really get a sense of Mozart's growth because his recordings of the early symphonies are very brilliant, very snappy, very fast, and almost mechanical. He lets them be what they are. He doesn't really get in the way that much. But with the late symphonies, all of a sudden he's a conductor, And so he does things. He does things all the time. He's playing with dynamics and balances and stuff. Some of his ideas I love. Some of them I hate. He does some of that, period instrument feminine endings to things that should remain forte or fortissimo and then have a sudden contrast in volume. I mean, that kind of stuff just bugs me because it sounds wrong in my opinion. But there's not so much of that. And he also has a lot of ideas that are really, really good. And so I'm going to play you a little bit of his Symphony number 20, just so you can hear just a touch for what the type of sound is in these performances. Very coiled and tense and springy, very exciting in these early, somewhat nondescript works. Here's a little bit of number 20. Interesting, right? So, I think that what you'll hear in this performance is that progression from Mozart, the young classical, really imitator working within the style, to Mozart, the genius who takes command of the style and shapes it to his own ends. That's one approach. The other approach is Charles Mackerras with the Prague Chamber Orchestra. Now, this one is almost the opposite of Fischer in the sense that the performances are absolutely consistent from start to finish. You know when you get to the end that you've heard the same composer you heard at the beginning. Now, that doesn't mean that Mackerras underplays those symphonies at all. He's Mackerras. He's a genius as a conductor. And his performances are wonderful. They're so musical. They're so full of life. They're always informed by just incredible musicianship and intelligence. This is Czech orchestra, great woodwinds. You hear those woodwind parts. But the thing that makes this set interesting, and at first it annoyed me, and it really doesn't so much anymore, is that he uses an optional, very optional, probably inauthentic harpsichord continuo. That we know would have been used in the early symphonies. We don't know anything about the late symphonies and whether it would have been used or not. It didn't need it. So they don't need it. But he uses it consistently all the way through. And just that little touch, it's not obtrusive. It's not like one of those period performances where the harpsichord continuo guy is like a soloist no matter what else is going on. It never gets in the way of the orchestra. It retires when the solo winds are playing and other people are doing stuff. It gets out of the way. It's very, very tastefully managed. But my point is the sonic conception of the entire set of symphonies is consistent from beginning to the end. So it's as if they're all performed in the same frame, in the same environment, the same audible environment. And I think it does a sort of a wonderful thing because, again, you hear the growth in Mozart's genius within a context. And so although that continuo was there in those late symphonies, sort of in the back, there's so much happening in the front, you don't even care. It doesn't matter. In a way, you can hear Mozart almost outgrowing the style of his youth as he writes the late symphonies, even though they're still performed in the same manner stylistically. I think it's fascinating, and it's very, very different from Adam Fischer because Mackerras is not a micromanager and he's not an interventionist in that sense. He just operates through his handling of rhythm and balance and texture, a lot like Sándor Vég. Everything that he does just comes alive because he knows how to phrase, how to make the music sing, all of those things. And I'm not saying that Fischer doesn't, but his approach is different. So this is Mackerras with the Prague Chamber Orchestra on Telarc, and this is Adam Fischer with the Danish National Chamber Orchestra on Da Capo. And these are my two picks, both of them really, for complete Mozart symphony cycles. Cycles. There will always be great performances of individual works, and we're probably going to have to start talking about some of those too as time goes on. But I wanted you to be straight and clear and have choices to get a box of the whole things, because most of you probably will just want one, maybe two, and you'll be done with it. And it's enough. It's enough for the early works. There's no reason to do what I do and have a dozen different versions of Symphony number 14. It's just completely unnecessary. You're not going to hear so many differences or insights or whatever, or even in a perverse performance. The music doesn't sustain that kind of repetition. So by all means, get a Mozart box. Listen to how he became Mozart. Revel in these delightful early pieces that only exist to give joy, to bring pleasure, and they do that admirably. And it's enough. It's enough. So with that, folks, keep on listening and take care. Thank you for joining me.